Subscribe to take your place in this universe full of science fiction and horror stories, and go after the unknown, because some truths are hidden in the dark. The first time they came, they did not arrive as conquerors, nor did they darken the skies with an armada. They did not announce their presence with fire or war, nor did they demand surrender at the barrel of a weapon. They came with words, carefully chosen, spoken in the silken tones of diplomats, wrapped in the illusion of benevolence. Their emissaries, draped in fabrics that shimmered like liquid mercury, walked with the calculated grace of a species that had long since ceased to fear anything. Their faces, elongated and smooth, betrayed no emotion, only an unsettling stillness. They called themselves the Zerath, the architects of civilization, the keepers of balance in a galaxy teeming with the reckless and the misguided. They spoke of order, prosperity, and enlightenment, and for those who listened, there was a moment, brief but real, where the dream of ascension seemed within reach. But beneath their grand proclamations lay a truth far less poetic. Humanity was nothing more than an anomaly, a genetic mistake, a race that had defied its natural limitations and stumbled blindly into the vastness of space. The decision had been made before the first handshake, before the first treaty was signed, before the first Earthborn diplomat had ever set foot on a Zerathian world. Compliance was inevitable. Some resisted. There were outbursts, isolated skirmishes, small factions that believed they could stand against the tides of history. But the Zerath did not wage wars. They extinguished them. They did not respond with fleets or orbital bombardments. They simply erased resistance at its roots. Nations collapsed not under siege, but under the unbearable weight of coerced obedience. Leaders were removed, replaced, repurposed. Armies were dismantled. Military technology was restricted, rationed, and eventually outlawed. Humanity, once divided by borders and ideologies, found itself unified under one simple, inescapable truth. They were no longer their own masters. 20 years had passed since Earth became a vassal world, a footnote in the Edict of Galactic Compliance. The transformation had been slow, insidious, a quiet subjugation rather than a violent occupation. To the ordinary citizen, life still held an illusion of normalcy. They still worked, still married, still raised children beneath the same sun. But there were shifts, subtle yet suffocating, a tightening noose that never quite stopped pulling. The skyports hummed with the presence of Zerathian sentinels. Their towering forms a silent reminder of who truly owned the stars. The world's economy no longer served its own people, but fed into the endless machine of the Zerathian Empire. Laws had been rewritten, cultures repurposed, history sanitized to better fit within the framework of obedient assimilation. But for all their intelligence, for all their careful calculations, the Zerath had made one catastrophic miscalculation. They believed humanity had surrendered. Hale Carter knew better. He stood at the edge of an observation deck, high above the cityscape of Echelon Spire, watching the artificial dusk settle over the skyline. The towering structures of glass and steel gleamed beneath the shifting hues of the simulated atmosphere, a sterile imitation of what had once been real. Beyond the containment dome, the stars flickered coldly, distant and indifferent. Somewhere out there, Earth's future was being rewritten in secret. Hale's grip tightened on the railing. The capital of compliance, they called it. Built upon the ruins of old Geneva, it stood as a monument to the submission of an entire species. He had walked its corridors, dined in its halls, shaken hands with those who had willingly traded their loyalty for longevity, influence, power. He had memorized their faces. Soon, he would erase them. A quiet presence stirred behind him, breaking the silence without a sound. He did not need to turn to know who it was. "You've been staring at the sky too long," Celeste Imani said, her voice even measured. He turned his head slightly, just enough to catch the reflection of her face against the glass. Shadows stretched across her sharp features, the neon glow of the city casting fractured light along the edges of her form. She had the look of someone who had long since learned to keep their emotions in check, A woman who had spent too many years wearing a mask that was no longer meant for survival, but for war. Celeste had been an outlier, even before the fall. The daughter of a former senator, she had been raised in the corridors of power, taught the art of diplomacy, only to watch her father executed for daring to defy the new order. She had spent the years that followed in the underbelly of the world, moving between shadows, smuggling people off-world, building networks of quiet resistance. Then the Zerath made her an ambassador, a convenient pawn, a bridge between humanity and its overlords. What they failed to recognize was that she had learned to wear their gift of authority as a weapon. Hale exhaled, his gaze returning to the skyline. They don't look up anymore. Celeste moved to stand beside him, her arms folding across her chest. They're afraid of what they'll see. He let out a dry chuckle. Or what they won't. Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken understanding. She reached into the folds of her coat, withdrawing a small, unmarked data chip, no larger than a fingernail, yet impossibly heavy with the weight of what it contained. Final confirmation came an hour ago, she said, her voice devoid of pretense. Everything's in place. Hale took the chip, turning it over between his fingers. It felt impossibly small, fragile, yet within it lay the culmination of decades of silent defiance. He did not need to ask what it contained. He already knew. In the fleet, a flicker of something passed across Celeste's expression. Not hesitation, but something sharper, something dangerous. You wouldn't believe what they built in the dark. Hale's pulse quickened. For 20 years, humanity had played its part, bowed, smiled, served. It had willingly placed chains upon itself, played the part of the obedient, the conquered, the complacent. The Zerath, so assured of their dominion, had never once considered the possibility that those chains had been forged for a purpose. The Zerath had made one fatal mistake. They mistook patience for passivity. Hale turned from the skyline, sliding the chip into his palm. Then it begins. Celeste's lips curved, just slightly, into something that was neither a smile nor a smirk. Something sharper, something filled with the quiet promise of vengeance. By this time next week, she murmured, the stars will belong to us again. Neither of them spoke of what it would cost. Neither of them acknowledged the blood that would be spilled before it was over. But for the first time in 20 years, Earth was not afraid. For the first time, humanity was no longer waiting. It was hunting. The crate hit the ground with a dull clang, metal on metal. Quinn crouched beside it, running his fingers over the reinforced casing before prying it open. The glow of stolen Zerath circuitry cast eerie shadows against his face. Tiny pulses of electric blue flickered along the edges of the components. Unmistakably alien, unmistakably dangerous. This, Quinn murmured, reverence slipping into his voice, is going to make things very interesting. Hale Carter stood nearby, arms folded, watching as the rest of the team unloaded the shipment. Every piece of stolen technology, every salvage part, had been acquired at great risk, smuggled through corridors of power that should have been airtight. But nothing was airtight, not when desperation had made spies of the oppressed. They were in one of the deepest levels of the underground resistance complex, hidden beneath the skeletal remains of an old transit system, a place long forgotten by those who now ruled the world above. The air smelled of rust, damp stone, and machine oil. The hum of generators vibrated faintly through the walls, an artificial heartbeat sustaining the last embers of rebellion. Beyond the storage area, past rows of reinforced consoles and makeshift workstations, Dominic Vance stood in the command chamber. He had been here longer than anyone, a man who had watched entire movements die, seen entire dreams collapse under the weight of reality. He had learned not to hope. Hope was dangerous. But now, something flickered in his gaze. Not hope exactly, but the ghost of it. "You're late," he said without looking up from the screen. Hale stepped forward, tossing a data chip onto the table beside him. Had to make a detour. Vance picked up the chip and nodded toward Quinn, who was already moving, inserting it into the terminal. The display flickered, shifting through layers of encryption before feeding its contents into the network. The moment the decryption finalized, Celeste Amani stepped into the light, arms crossed, her eyes scanning the data with the sharp focus of someone who could see the battle before it even began. They watched in silence as the stolen fleet schematics unfurled before them. It was real, not just a handful of hidden warships, not a desperate last stand, but a fully operational force. AI-driven battlecruisers, reverse-engineered Zerathian disruptors, even a prototype planetary railgun hidden on one of Saturn's moons. Vance exhaled slowly. Damn. Hale folded his arms. Told you we weren't just stalling. Celeste's gaze remained locked on the screen, but her eyes darkened, a flicker of something not quite right surfacing in her expression. There's a problem. Hale glanced at her. What? These aren't just Zayrath defense formations. She tapped a section of the data stream. There are human signatures embedded in these fleet rosters. The room went still. Vance's jaw tightened. Quinn stopped typing. A quiet, suffocating weight settled over them. The kind that came with knowing an enemy was closer than you ever expected. Hale's stomach nodded. You're saying? Celeste nodded. We have collaborators. Hale clenched his fists. It had always been a possibility. For every faction that resisted, there were those who had bent the knee for survival, for power, for something worse. The overseers, the human enforcers who ruled under Zayrath authority, had not just governed Earth, they had sold it. Vance turned to Quinn. Filter it. Give me the names. Quinn's fingers flew over the console, isolating the list of traitors embedded within the Zayrath fleet. The screen shifted, scrolling through a series of familiar faces, some expected, some not. And then Hale saw it. Aaron Carter. His breath hitched. The room blurred for a second, fading into static. The name burned against the screen like a wound that refused to heal. Hale's brother. His mind snapped back to another time, another life. Aaron, laughing at him across their father's worn-out kitchen table. Aaron, telling him that resistance was useless, that humanity had lost, that it was better to survive in chains than die chasing a fantasy. But seeing his name here, not just as a believer in submission, but as an architect of Earth's enslavement, was something else entirely. Vance exhaled. I take it that one's personal. Hale's voice was quieter than he intended. It doesn't matter. Celeste didn't look at him, but when she spoke, her words were measured, precise. It does. He forced the thought aside, burying it beneath the weight of what needed to be done. Vance tapped the console. Final confirmation, he said. What's our first move? Celeste pulled up a new schematic, a towering Zerathian control nexus on the outskirts of Echelon Spire. This, she said, is where we start. The nexus was the nerve center of Earth's compliance, a sprawling facility that monitored all communications, trade routes, and surveillance feeds. It was the Zayrath's eye, an omnipresent watchtower ensuring obedience across the planet. But more than that, it was the key to Earth's lockdown. Hale studied the schematic. You're talking about a full-scale breach. Celeste nodded. We cut their surveillance, we shut down their data streams, and we blind them long enough for the fleet to strike. Quinn exhaled. No one's ever gotten inside the Nexus. Hale's fingers drummed against his arm. That's because no one's tried. Vance's gaze hardened. You're serious. Hale met his eyes. When have I ever not been? A beat passed. Then, slowly, a grim smile ghosted across Vance's face. Well, he said, I hope you've got a damn good way in. Celeste exchanged a glance with Hale before pulling up another feed. A moving blueprint of an underground access route, one marked with a Zerathian security signature. We have a key, she said. Before anyone could respond, the console flickered. A new transmission flashed across the monitor. An intercepted Zerathian message, heavily encrypted but unmistakable. A priority alert. A warning. Vance narrowed his eyes. We've got a problem. Hale turned to Celeste. She was already reading the subtext, already ahead of them. They know, she said. Hale exhaled, steadying himself. Then we move fast. Then we move now. The rebellion wasn't coming. It was already here. Wind funneled through the underbelly of Echelon Spire, curling through tunnels like a whisper of ghosts. Lost voices carried through steel and stone. Above, the city pulsed with artificial life, sleek and sterile, a monument to compliance. But beneath its skin, in a labyrinth of forgotten infrastructure, something else stirred. Hale, Carter moved through the shadows, his steps measured, his breathing even. He could hear the distant hum of energy conduits pulsing in the walls, a rhythmic reminder that this world no longer belonged to humanity. The air carried the metallic tang of rust and coolant, the scent of old machinery still clinging to life. Beside him, Celeste Imani moved with silent precision, her dark gaze scanning ahead, always calculating. It didn't need words. The weight between them, the unspoken understanding, was enough. The entrance to the Resistance's hidden forward command station loomed before them, a thick, reinforced door, its surface scarred from an older war. The console beside it flickered, scanning for identification. Hale pressed his palm against the reader. A heartbeat passed. The system accepted him. The door groaned open. Inside, the air shifted, charged, restless, alive with movement. Tactical displays pulsed against the walls, feeding streams of encrypted data from hidden relays buried deep in the city's infrastructure. Weapons lined the far racks, each one a defiance against occupation. Modified Zarathian disruptors, old ballistic firearms stripped of identity markers, blades honed for silent kills. At the room's heart, Dominic Vance stood over the central console. A veteran of a war that had never truly ended, his presence was like iron, solid, unyielding, tempered by time and loss. His scarred features remained unreadable, but Hale caught the tension in his stance, the way his fingers hovered over the holographic display. Something was wrong. Hale stepped forward. "Talk to me." Vance gestured toward the screen. A series of pulsing alien symbols scrawled across the interface, shifting in their unnatural script. "They picked up one of our ghost signals," Vance said. Hale's stomach tightened. Quinn, hunched over the decryption station, scowled. "They shouldn't have. Our masking protocols were solid." He exhaled sharply, fingers flying over the console. "Damn it. There's a secondary encryption layer. I didn't catch it before." Celeste stepped closer. "You're saying this was a trap?" Quinn's hesitation said more than words. "Maybe. Or maybe they weren't even looking for us, until now." A heavy silence settled over them. Vance folded his arms. "They're moving." Hale's pulse quickened. "How much do they know?" Quinn's jaw clenched. "Not enough to pinpoint us. But they flagged an anomaly near the Nexus perimeter." Hale exchanged a look with Celeste. No time left. Celeste inhaled slowly, her expression unreadable. Do they suspect an infiltration, or just monitoring? Too soon to tell, Quinn admitted. But security reinforcements are already shifting. He turned to face them fully. "We don't have the luxury of time anymore." Hale didn't hesitate. "We move now." A brief silence stretched across the room, thick with unspoken meaning. Vance nodded once. "Then we adapt." Celeste pulled up the schematics of the Zayrath Control Nexus, a towering structure embedded into the eastern skyline of Echelon Spire. Its geometric design alien, its presence a silent watchtower over Earth's compliance. Hale studied the pathways. "We still have access through the maintenance sector?" Celeste's expression hardened. "Barely. Security rotations are unpredictable now." Hale exhaled. "Then we make them predictable." Vance arched a brow. "Ow!" A slow smirk ghosted across Hale's lips. "We make them think they already found us somewhere else." Quinn let out a low chuckle. "Decoy op." Vance cracked his knuckles. "I'll pull a team. We stir up hell on the opposite side of the district. Explosions, civilian disruptions, false signals to trigger their automated defense grid." Celeste nodded. "While they're chasing shadows, we slip in undetected." Hale met her gaze. This was it. "Gear up," he said. "We move in 30. The city shimmered in the neon haze of artificial lights, a mirage of order masking the fractures beneath. Hale, Celeste, and their infiltration unit moved through the lower streets like ghosts, their steps silent against the damp pavement. Above them, the first detonations thundered, a distant roar shaking the bones of the city. The decoy team had done their job. Hale tapped his earpiece. "Status." Vance's voice crackled through the line. They took the bait. You've got 10 minutes before they pull back reinforcements. Copy that. Celeste worked the access panel, fingers moving swiftly through the bypass code. A pause. Then the reinforced door hissed open. They slipped inside. The corridors were cold, lined with pulsing Zarathian conduits, energy humming beneath their feet. The architecture twisted in ways that unsettled the eye, a reminder that this place was never meant for human hands. They moved deeper, one level down, then two. Then Quinn whispered, "Wait." Hale halted. "What?" Quinn stared at his wrist device. His voice was a breath of static. "Why are the security logs already active?" The answer came before he could finish the thought. "Hale." The voice slid into his earpiece like a blade. Familiar. Cold. Aaron Carter. The world snapped into focus. His brother's voice held an edge of amusement. "Did you really think we wouldn't see you coming?" Hale's grip tightened around his weapon. Aaron continued, voice smooth, controlled. "The rebellion was never going to win. You just didn't know it yet." The walls shuddered. Red warning lights flared across the corridors. The airlocks hissed closed. A trap. Hale forced himself to breathe. "Aaron." Aaron exhaled softly. "Turn back while you still can." Hale clenched his jaw. "Not a chance." His brother sighed. "I thought you'd say that." The comm line cut to silence. Then a deep mechanical hum filled the corridor. Something was waking up. Quinn's voice was sharp. "Hale, what the hell is that?" Celeste's fingers tightened on her disruptor. Her eyes flickered to the pulsing conduits, then to the floor beneath them. "They're activating something." Then the lights snapped back on. Not red, but a sharp, sterile white. A low vibration shook the walls. A sound Hale didn't recognize. Something unnatural, something alive. A door at the far end of the corridor unsealed with a slow, deliberate hiss. Then he saw them. Zarathian sentinels. Already waiting. The rebellion hadn't just walked into a trap. They had walked into a slaughterhouse. The sentinels did not move. Not yet. They stood in the corridor, motionless and precise, their metallic bodies gleaming under the sterile white light. Their narrow, elongated skulls bore no eyes, no features, only the sleek, polished surface of advanced Zarathian engineering. They had no need for faces. Their purpose was singular. And then, in unison, their heads tilted toward Hale. His fingers tightened around his weapon. Celeste, beside him, barely breathed. Quinn froze mid-step, his eyes darting between the silent machines. The air was thick, humming with a tension that pressed against the bones, as if the very walls had begun to anticipate violence. Then the lights flickered once, twice, before stabilizing again. The lead sentinel took a step forward. Containment protocol engaged. It said in a voice that wasn't a voice at all, just a collection of tones woven into something that mimicked language. Hale fired first. The plasma bolt struck the machine's chest, but instead of piercing through, it rippled against an unseen barrier, a kinetic shield, dissipating the energy like it was nothing. And then hell erupted. The sentinels moved as one, their sleek forms shifting with inhuman precision. Weapons extended from their arms, thin, gleaming barrels pulsing with charged energy. The corridor flashed with gunfire, blinding bursts of white and violet reflecting off the metallic walls. Hale dived behind a console, feeling the heat of a blast pass inches from his head. Celeste rolled into cover beside him, already firing, her shots ricocheting uselessly off the sentinel shields. Quinn ducked behind a bulkhead, cursing under his breath. "They adapted to our weapons," Celeste hissed. Hale's mind raced. The kinetic shields weren't just standard defenses, they were learning. Another barrage of energy bolts tore into the walls, sending metal fragments cascading through the air. The sentinels moved methodically, never rushing, never hesitating. They didn't need to overwhelm, they only needed to advance. Hale tapped his earpiece. "Vance, we're compromised." The line crackled. Then, understood. Evac plan. Hale fired another shot, this time aiming for the ceiling above the sentinels. The bolt hit a support beam, causing a section of piping to collapse, raining debris over their attackers. It barely slowed them. "We don't have one," Hale said. Vance exhaled through the comm, then make one. Celeste reloaded, her jaw clenched. "We need an override. Those shields are keyed to something. We kill the source, we kill them." Hale scanned the corridor. His mind filtered through the schematics he had memorized. There, a control panel embedded in the far wall, a direct uplink to the security mainframe. "Cover me," he ordered. Without waiting for response, he moved. Fast, low, weaving between cover as another volley of fire streaked past him. The air tasted sharp with ozone, the charged energy crackling around them. He reached the panel, ripped off the cover, and scanned the interface. Lines of alien script blurred across the screen, unfamiliar but structured. He wasn't Quinn, he wasn't a slicer, but he knew how to make systems break. His fingers flew over the controls. Access required. Damn it. Behind him, Celeste fired in rapid succession, her shots forcing a sentinel to adjust its aim for half a second. Quinn was yelling something, but the noise of combat drowned it out. Hale made a decision. He didn't have time to override the system manually. He pulled a plasma charge from his belt, set the timer for 5 seconds, and slammed it against the panel. Then he ran. "Get down." The explosion ripped through the corridor, the shockwave knocking Hale forward. A blast of white light seared his vision as the pulse shorted out every energy field in range. And then, for the first time, the sentinels staggered. Celeste didn't hesitate. She fired, and this time the bolt tore through metal, cutting deep into the nearest machine. The sentinel jerked, its movements glitching, sparks flying from the wound. Hale twisted on his heel and fired into the next. The once indestructible machines collapsed one by one, their bodies convulsing as their systems failed. Then silence. Hale exhaled. His lungs burned. Quinn let out a breathless laugh, half exhilaration, half disbelief. "That was the dumbest plan I've ever seen." Celeste shoved another power cell into her weapon. "It worked, didn't it?" Hale tapped his earpiece again. "Vance, we're clear. For now." The response came fast. Too fast. "No, you're not." The voice wasn't Vance's. Hale's stomach dropped. "Aaron, you're so predictable," his brother continued, his tone almost bored. "Shoot your way in, blast your way out. But you don't think ahead, do you?" Hale looked up, his gut twisted. The fight had been a distraction. The corridor past the sentinels was sealed, reinforced blast doors locking them inside. But worse than that, a low vibration rumbled beneath their feet. Something massive was powering up. Aaron sighed into the comm. "You triggered the failsafe." Quinn was already scanning his wrist display. "Something's coming online. Something big." Celeste turned toward Hale. "Orders." His pulse was pounding, but he forced his thoughts into clarity. Panic was the enemy. Fear was the weapon of the weak. He was not weak. "We keep moving," he said. "We find another way out." Aaron chuckled softly. "You won't." The lights flickered again, the white glow replaced by deep, pulsing crimson. Warning sirens howled through the nexus, a low mechanical wail reverberating through the walls. The vibration beneath them intensified. Celeste's voice was sharp. "Hale, what did we just wake up?" Hale didn't answer, because he didn't know. And for the first time in a long time, that terrified him. The walls trembled, sending dust and debris trembling from the overhead conduits. The red emergency lighting pulsed like a heartbeat, casting shifting shadows through the corridor. Beneath their feet, the vibration deepened. Not mechanical, not rhythmic, but something vast waking from dormancy. Hale forced his breath steady, his weapon raised, his mind locking onto the one unshakable truth. This was a trap, and Aaron had been waiting for them to trigger it. Quinn's fingers flew over his wrist display, eyes scanning. Power fluctuations across the entire nexus. This isn't just a lockdown. His voice had lost its usual edge of sarcasm. Something is feeding off the activation. Celeste stood rigid beside him, her disruptor held close. Controlled, but not calm. "The failsafe isn't to keep us from escaping," she murmured. "It's to keep whatever is down there contained." Hale glanced at the sealed blast doors, then at the hallway behind them. No exits. No fallback points. They were running out of time. He tapped his earpiece. "Vance, do you copy?" Only static answered. He cursed. Aaron's voice crackled through instead, smooth and unhurried. Losing your connection. Hale? A pause. Or maybe losing control? Hale ignored him. He turned to Quinn. Find us another way out. Quinn didn't argue, just ran his fingers over the display, searching for a weakness in the Nexus layout. Give me 30 seconds. Hale turned his attention to the walls. They pulsed faintly, energy traveling in rivulets beneath their surfaces. Not just conduits, veins. This place wasn't just active. It was alive. Celeste whispered, "Do you feel that?" Hale did. A shift in the air. Not sound, not movement, but presence. Then something moved behind the walls. A low, guttural groan vibrated through the metal. Not mechanical, but organic, ancient. Hale's grip tightened on his weapon. Quinn sucked in a sharp breath. Got it. There's a maintenance passage 2 levels down, but the lights died. Darkness swallowed them whole. For half a second, only breathing filled the space. Then, one by one, rows of glowing red eyes flickered open in the distance. Celeste moved first. Cover. The corridor erupted in blazing gunfire and streaks of plasma, the darkness flashing with each shot. The things that emerged weren't sentinels. They were machines. They were Zarathian, but wrong. Twisted. Their bodies were elongated, their limbs spliced with jagged metal plating. Their skin stretched over synthetic grafts, pulsing with veins of dark energy. Eyes burned crimson, but beneath their exposed musculature, there was nothing human left. Quinn fired first, his shot hitting center mass, but the creature didn't fall. Instead, it moved, wrong, too fast, too fluid. Hale barely dodged as one lunged toward him. He jammed his disruptor under its ribcage and fired. The creature jerked, convulsed, then exploded into a mess of molten flesh and wire. Celeste drove her knife into the throat of another, twisting the blade before yanking it free. The thing didn't scream. It simply collapsed, twitching like a severed nerve. Hale didn't hesitate. He grabbed Quinn and shoved him toward the nearest security panel. Below the hatch. Now! Quinn's hands shook as he activated the emergency override. The ground trembled again, but this time, something below responded. Aaron's voice drifted through the speakers. You really should have left when you had the chance. The blast doors groaned. Metal twisted, bent outward. Something on the other side was forcing them open. Celeste pulled Hale back. This isn't just a containment facility. Her voice was tight, her breath controlled. This is an experiment. Hale's gut turned cold. Then the doors ripped apart. What stepped through was not Zarathian. It was ancient, colossal, a nightmare of wires and flesh, its form shifting, its limbs forming and unforming as though reality itself couldn't decide what it was. And it was awake. Hale had a single second to process before it moved, fast despite its size. Its arm, if it could be called that, lashed forward, colliding with the corridor wall and sending shockwaves through the station. Quinn barely dived out of the way. Celeste gritted her teeth. Hale! I see it. He fired at its core, but the energy dissipated before impact, drawn into the creature's shifting mass. It was absorbing the energy. It was feeding. Quinn's voice cracked. How the hell do we kill that? Hale thought fast. No shields. No flesh to wound. But it had been locked away, sealed in this place for a reason. Celeste's eyes flicked toward the overhead conduits. Power lines. Hale understood immediately. We overload the grid. Quinn was already moving. I can rewire the station's core, but I need time. Celeste fired at the creature's legs, aiming to slow it. We don't have time. The thing shifted again, its form convulsing, its shape solidifying into something more humanoid, its head turning toward them. A voice. Not its own. Aaron's. Goodbye, Hale. Then the power grid overloaded. Blinding light erupted through the station as Quinn ripped the circuits apart, sending a surge of raw energy through the conduits. The creature screamed, not in sound, but in a frequency that shattered through the comms, through their skulls, through the very station itself. It convulsed, imploding inward, its form breaking apart, fragments disintegrating into raw static. Then silence. The walls stopped shaking. The The station groaned, its systems flickering in protest. The backup power stabilized, casting a dull glow over the wreckage. Hale forced himself upright, his breath ragged. Quinn was on his knees, gripping his temples. Celeste pulled herself up, eyes still locked on the space where the creature had stood. Aaron's voice was gone. The comms were silent. Quinn exhaled. Please tell me we're never doing that again. Celeste wiped blood from her face. No guarantees. Hale pressed his hand against the nearest console, scanning the readouts. We need to go. Now. Celeste looked at him. And Aaron. Hale hesitated. Then, finally, we'll deal with him later. They turned toward the maintenance tunnel. Away from the wreckage. Away from a thing that had been locked beneath the Nexus. And into whatever nightmare waited next. The tunnel walls trembled, a final aftershock from the destruction they had left behind. Hale Carter pushed forward, his muscles aching, lungs burning from the stale, metallic air of the maintenance shaft. Every step was measured, every movement purposeful. There was no room for hesitation now. Behind him, Celeste Imani kept pace, her disruptor clutched in steady hands. Quinn staggered slightly, the effects of the power overload still rippling through his nervous system. But they didn't stop. Stopping meant dying. The Nexus had been a tomb, a prison for something ancient and wrong, and they had been the fools who unchained it. Hale's earpiece crackled. A voice, strained but alive. Hale, do you copy? Vance. Relief flickered, but he pushed it down. We're here. Vance's breath came sharp over the line. Whatever you did, you shook the whole damn city. I've got Zarathian patrols scrambling. And Carter's gone dark. Hale exhaled, the name sitting heavy in his mind. His brother was out there, watching, waiting. But for what? We're making our way to the evac point, he said. Status on the fleet? A pause. Then, Vance's voice, edged with something Hale didn't like. That's why I called. You need to see this. The transmission cut. Hale met Celeste's gaze. No words were needed. They moved. The shaft stretched on, opening into a disused transit corridor. They ran, feet hammering against the metal flooring, lungs dragging in cold air. The moment they reached the exit, the city's skyline loomed before them, and the sky was burning. Hale stopped cold, his heart slamming against his ribs. Above, the Zarathian fleet hung like gods of war, their enormous vessels casting elongated shadows across the city. But that wasn't what stopped him. It was the other ships, human ships, firing alongside them. Betrayal carved through his chest like a blade. Quinn swore. What the hell? Vance's voice returned, urgent. Carter made his move. He's not just working with them. He's leading their forces. A deep, guttural roar split the air. A Zarathian dreadnought unloading its energy cannons into the Resistance's fleet. Human ships shattered, debris spiraling into the atmosphere like dying embers. Celeste stepped beside him, her breath steady, but her hands were fists. Hale. He didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on the largest warship, hovering like a predator above the battlefield. Aaron's ship. Hale's fingers tightened around his weapon. The command center's compromised, Vance continued. We don't hold the upper hand anymore. Quinn pulled up data on his interface, scanning rapidly. They've cut off all retreat vectors. If we don't take that command ship, we lose everything. Hale's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a coup. His brother wasn't helping the Zarath. He was replacing them. Celeste didn't hesitate. Then we take the damn ship. Hale turned, forcing the weight of everything down, pressing it into something sharp, something useful. How many assets do we have left? Vance answered fast. Enough. But not for long. Hale nodded. Then we end this. They moved, slipping into the chaos of the city, making their way toward the launch site. Every street was war. Resistance fighters clashed with Overseer forces, the humans who had sided with the Zarath in exchange for power. Ships screamed overhead, their cannons lighting the battlefield in flashes of violet and gold. But Hale only saw one destination. Aaron. The launch pad was compromised, a battlefield in its own right. Zarathian soldiers moved through the wreckage, their organic metal armor gleaming under the flames. Hale and Celeste moved fast, cutting through them with precision. Quinn covered their flank, rerouting security systems, disabling auto turrets before they could lock on. Every step brought them closer to the waiting interceptor ship, their only chance at breaching the command vessel above. Hale barely reached the cockpit before Vance's voice cut in again. "Carter knows you're coming." Hale strapped in, locking the controls. "I'm counting on it." The ship lurched skyward, breaking through the atmosphere in a surge of force. Alarms screamed warnings, but Hale ignored them, his focus locked on the warship ahead. Aaron's ship. The vessel was a behemoth, its hull sleek, its Zarathian influence twisted into something new, something built for war. Aaron had been planning this for a long time. Hale pushed the thrusters to full. "Hold on." The ship pierced through enemy fire, weaving past the fleet's defenses. Quinn disabled the outer barrier, overriding the security codes with a calculated precision Hale didn't have time to appreciate. Then they were inside, landing in the main hangar. Hale unstrapped and stood. His weapon was already drawn. Celeste met his gaze. "We finished this." They moved through the corridors like ghosts, cutting through overseer forces with silent efficiency. The path to the command center was clear. Because Aaron wanted it to be. The doors slid open, and there he was. Aaron Carter stood before the expansive viewport, his back to them, watching as the battle unfolded beyond the glass. He turned slowly. Hale saw the familiarity in his face. Same eyes, same sharp features. But his brother was gone. Aaron's lips curled. "You always were predictable." Hale lifted his weapon. "You gave them everything." Aaron tilted his head, a trace of amusement in his eyes. "I didn't give them anything." He stepped forward, slow, deliberate. "I took it." Celeste shifted beside Hale, weapon trained, but Aaron didn't seem concerned. "You see," Aaron continued, "the Zayrath think they rule this galaxy." His voice dropped. "They don't." Hale held his ground. "Then who does?" Aaron smiled. "We do." The weight of those words settled over them like a storm. Hale understood then. Aaron hadn't sold humanity out. He had ensured its survival by making himself its ruler. "You're a tyrant," Hale said. Aaron shrugged. "Better a tyrant than a corpse." Outside, the battle raged, the rebellion fighting for its last breath. Hale gritted his teeth. "We're done talking." Aaron's smile didn't fade. "Then let's finish it." The room exploded into motion. Aaron moved first, fast, a disruptor flashing to life in his hand. Hale dodged, firing back. The shots tore through the space between them, searing into metal, ricocheting against the reinforced walls. Celeste engaged the overseers, cutting through them as the command center became a battlefield of its own. Hale's world narrowed. Aaron was fast, trained, precise, every move calculated. But Hale had something his brother didn't. He had nothing left to lose. The fight ended in a breath. A mistake. One slip, one fraction of an opening. Hale took it. His weapon pressed against Aaron's chest. Aaron exhaled, a small, almost amused smile playing on his lips. Hale pulled the trigger. Silence. Aaron staggered, his eyes dimming, breath shuddering. "You win." Hale caught him before he fell, lowering him to the floor. Blood stained the metal beneath them. Aaron coughed, his grip tightening once, then fading. "Make it count." His last words. Then he was gone. Hale stood. The battle was still raging, but he knew. It was over. Celeste stepped beside him. "Orders." Hale looked at the viewport, at the stars beyond. "We take back what's ours." And outside, the sky burned with the dawn of something new.